Thanks for joining me on episode 377 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Daryl Lyons, author of 18 to 80. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the right behavior with your money is key to doing that. And one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
God still wants more for you. There's still more for you to develop into. There's still more for you to grow into. There's still more for you to learn. There's still more people for you to love and more people for you to build a relationship with. There's still more people for you to help. There always is.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's Spiritual Foundation episode about investing in yourself, I talk with you about 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 through 10, how vulnerability often is truly strength, and why this concept applies to investing in yourself. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 through 10 goes like this. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." You know, you've heard me talk a lot on the podcast. If you've listened to a lot of the episodes, this concept comes up again and again of how there are often things that we look at as a paradox, or we look at as dichotomous. You know, you're either strong or weak. You're either this or that. And I talk a lot about how real understanding and real strength and often real theology, real words of God, come in understanding that some things are both and. That out of vulnerability comes strength, as opposed to because you are vulnerable, you are weak. You know, Dow and I talked a lot about this during Monday's episode, about this idea of how vulnerability is really a position of strength. Think about it like this. If you are going to open yourself up to be vulnerable to someone else, if you're going to share secrets about who you are, you have to actually really not only trust that person, but you actually have to have some sense of trust in yourself. You have to understand who you are and what this means. I look at it a lot like the passages that you see about where Jesus turns and washes his disciples' feet. See, at that time, in that role, the only people that would see your feet and wash them and clean them were either slaves who were powerless or your wife, your spouse, a woman. Not only because women in that society at that time were put in a position of having less power, but also because that is someone whom you could actually trust. And the reason for that is that the truth is, allowing someone to see your feet, allowing someone to wash your feet is a very intimate thing. Because see, if I can wash your feet, I'm seeing where you've been. And if I can see where you've been, then I know what you've been doing. I have insight into not just the face that you present to the world, but the real secret side of you, the part of you that you don't want the world to see begins to show up in the dust of your feet. This is part of this idea that Paul is talking about throughout Corinthians. this idea that out of being vulnerable, out of being weak, comes strength. Because as you open yourself up, as you become more vulnerable, then people begin to look to you and recognize in you a certain amount of confidence, a certain amount of strength, a certain amount of power. It turns out that the truth is that the person that shares first, the person that opens up first, the person that risks first is often looked at by others as the more mature person, the stronger person, the person who is a little bit further along in their journey. And often they are. It takes that. And this is about true vulnerability too. This isn't about faking it. This isn't about pretending to share who you are with someone just to manipulate them into doing what you want. No, this is about developing influence. And developing influence takes vulnerability. It takes being willing to go first. That's what leaders do. And all of this applies to investing in yourself because let's face it, if you think to yourself for a minute, who actually opens themselves up to the idea of learning? Who opens themselves up to submitting to a higher power? Who opens themselves up to being in the risky position of admitting that you don't know it all, of not being the smartest person in the room, of being maybe perhaps a leader and yet actually having to get help from the people that you lead? Because the truth is, you have to admit that you don't have all the answers. You need their help. It's not just a matter of you lead because you know it all. You actually have to open yourself up to the risk of telling the people who follow you that you need their help. And you really do. See, those sorts of positions are vulnerable positions, and yet they're also positions of strength. And the first step to investing in yourself is recognizing that you have weaknesses. It's recognizing that you have areas of strength that you need to grow in. It's recognizing that you're not done with the journey. It's recognizing that you need to build on who you are and what you are each and every day to get better and better and better each and every day. No matter how good you are, you're still not as good as you can be. No matter how far along in the journey you are, you still haven't reached the end. God still wants more for you. There's still more for you to develop into. There's still more for you to grow into. There's still more for you to learn. There's still more people for you to love and more people for you to build a relationship with. There's still more people for you to help. There always is. And that'll burn you out and frustrate you if you don't plug yourself into a higher power, if you don't plug yourself into the source of all strength. But man, if you do that, and if you open yourself up to being vulnerable, if you open yourself up to doing ministry not for people, but with people, if you open yourself up to admitting that you don't have all the answers, to admitting that you're not better than anyone else, but you're also a sinner on this journey along with them, then that vulnerable position brings you great strength. And that's what Paul's trying to tell us in 2 Corinthians. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor. Go over to facebook.com/inspired stewardship and like our Facebook page and mark it that you'd like to get notifications from us so that we can connect with you on Facebook and make sure that we're serving you to the best of our abilities with time and tips there. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.